So this meeting is being recorded. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Anagnost. I work in the Planning and Development Department at the City of Raleigh. This meeting is to introduce you to a new text change that's been authorized by the Raleigh City Council. That's the wrong presentation. That's okay. The text change is to authorize a new accessory use in residential districts called an accessory commercial unit. And the goal of that is to basically enable there to be additional opportunities for retail or services in people's neighborhoods so that you can access those types of things without having to drive a car as much. So this was authorized earlier this year, and it came out of one of the city council committees called Economic Development and Innovation. And they had a lot of conversation about, particularly about facilitating access to fresh and healthy foods within neighborhoods. And this is kind of spun off of that, of thinking about ways to have more commercial outlets in residential context. So there's some other existing uses in the city's Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO, that's our zoning code. And so there are other ways you can have a business in a residential district. This is a list of those. So there's one called home occupation, one called live work, and one called home daycare or daycare comma home. And so home occupation, again, these are already allowed in the city zoning, is where you have a business in your home that is pretty much completely concealed within the home. And so you really shouldn't be able to tell from the outside that there's a business operating there. And so that means no signage, no employees, no customers, no storage of materials outside. It really is, it could be somebody like tax preparation or something like that, where really everything is happening indoors. And so that can be done with a zoning permit. You can come to the city office and apply for that zoning permit. That can be granted by staff in the city office. Excuse me. The second type of use that already exists in the code is called live work. Live work requires what's called a special use permit before you can establish that. And that means you would have to go to the Board of Adjustment. And that's a public process where you make the case for why the business you'd like to start is compatible with the neighborhood and would not have impacts on neighboring properties. And so in addition to the special use permit, there are additional standards that apply to live work. And you can see those here. So you are allowed to have a small amount of employees at the business, as well as customers come to the business. You can have parking, and you can have a sign. You can have one sign on the business. And so that's live work. And then finally, there's home daycare. And so home daycare is allowed in residential districts. It does not require a special use permit. So again, that's just coming to the city office and applying for a zoning permit through staff. And it is fairly limited in the size of the operation, so a maximum of 8 children that can be in the home at any one time. And then the employees must be related to the operator. So what does TC-12-21 do? It modifies some of those existing uses and then adds this new one called accessory commercial units. And so we'll get into the details of that here. So home daycare will not change. So anyone currently operating a home daycare, they can continue their activities as normal, and they do not have to, this text change would not affect that in any way. What it does is it modifies those other two categories, home occupation and live work, and then adds this third one, accessory commercial unit. And specifically the way it does that, is that it removes home occupation completely. And the reason for that is because the proposed text change also removes the special use permit requirement for the live work use. And so without the requirement for that additional level of permitting through the Board of Adjustment, live work and home occupation would have the same level of permitting, which is an application filed at the city offices. And so it doesn't make sense to have two very similar uses with very similar permitting processes, but one is slightly more restrictive and one is slightly less restrictive. Basically, anything that you could do in home occupation, you could also do in live work. And so there's really no reason to have home occupation if live work does not require a special use permit. So that's the first thing that TC-12-21 does. The second thing it does is that it does modify the standards in live work a little bit just to make them consistent with the other standards in the accessory commercial use, and then accessory commercial unit, and then it adds the ACU use as well. So how does live work get modified by TC-12-21? Again, removing the special use permit requirement, and then it does clearly state that they are allowed in accessory structures, and so accessory commercial units would not be allowed in accessory structures. And so the intent there is that the live work use is a more modest use. It's less active and less focused on what you might say are pass-by customers or patrons. And so it could be appropriate in a side or rear yard where there could be an accessory structure. And then the other thing is removing that cap on customers of 5 customers. That's something that's very difficult for the city to enforce and really should reflect the base philosophy there, which is safety. And so having the fire code do that work is a better way of doing that. And the fire code is based on the square footage of the use and will be enforced by the fire marshal's office. And would be, in most cases, pretty similar to 5 people anyway, because of the scale of these uses. And then the last thing that the modifications to live work do is to clearly align the allowed uses in live work with the defined uses elsewhere in the city code. But currently, the way they're listed in the live work use is not an exact match with the places they're defined elsewhere. It's just really just making sure that everything is clear what use means what in the different parts of the code. Okay, so those are kind of the housekeeping type modifications that are in TC-12-21. And really the core change then is this accessory commercial unit, the new use that's being introduced. And so there are several standards that go into that to limit impacts on surrounding areas. But the first thing that is regulated is the allowed uses. And so you can see those listed here and a few examples. So office is pretty clear. Indoor recreation is basically like could be a dance academy, karate studio, yoga studio, those kind of things where it's not selling goods, it's providing a service or an experience. And then personal service, similar things, so that's like a hair salon, nail salon, just basically providing a personalized service. Retail, eating establishment, that's a restaurant. And then light manufacturing. So light manufacturing is already allowed in home occupation and live work, but it's somewhat narrowly defined. And but what that means is things like making clothing, making jewelry, things of that nature, woodworking, those kind of things, which are, and there are many light manufacturing uses that are not allowed in these defined uses, but basically the less impactful ones would be allowed. All right, so those are the allowed uses. Then there are.
John, sorry for that.
Yes.
I think I'm having issues in the few people.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Let me do that. Oops. Sorry, folks. I'm just going to pause for a moment to admit people to the from the waiting room. Okay. So. Keegan, I'm going to make you the co-host so that I failed to do that earlier. All right, apologies, folks. So for those who have just joined us, we were viewing a presentation about the text change TC-12-21. And so what we had gone through was that there are 3 existing uses that are allowed in the city's code: home occupation, live work, and home daycare, that are similar, and that home daycare would not be modified. Home occupation would be removed because it would become redundant, and then live work would be modified to remove the special use permit and to clarify other features of that use, specifically that it would be allowed in accessory structure. And so then we were just getting into the actual standards for accessory commercial units. And the first thing we talked about was the uses that are allowed there.
Can you explain special use permit?
Yes. Actually, what I'd like to do is the presentation only has like 3 or 4 more slides. And so what we can do is I'll finish the presentation and then we'll jump into questions and I'll plenty of time to talk about the questions.
And
Thank you.
I did receive a comment, someone's kid had a local hearing.
Hearing, okay.
Yes.
I'll stand closer to the device here. All right, so there's the set of allowed uses for accessory commercial units, and then there's a series of standards that are specified. And you can see those here. So only one would be allowed per lot. There must be someone residing in the structure, the principal structure on the lot. So, you know, in most situations, this is going to be a house that somebody either converts a portion of into a business or puts an addition on it and makes a business. And so the house itself would still need to be occupied as a residential use, a permanent residence. There is a maximum size of 1,000 square feet or 40% of that structure, whichever is smaller. And then limits on hours of operation, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Direct pedestrian access is required from the street. Outdoor seating is not allowed, and that's specifically outdoor seating associated with the business. So if you have a back deck, you could still use your back deck for the residents there. Service areas and mechanical equipment are required to be screened in the same way that they would be in a mixed-use district in the city zoning. Service areas, that means loading, delivery areas, garbage service areas, that kind of thing. Those are required to have screening. Lighting must be full cutoff. Full cutoff means the light fixture has to direct the light towards the ground. So light can't be scattering out horizontally from a light fixture. And then outdoor display would be allowed with accessory commercial units. It is not allowed for live work, but it would be allowed up to 50 square feet directly between the building and the street and would have to be removed at night. And no outdoor storage is allowed. So any storage of products or materials has to be internal to the building. And this is just an example of what we mean by outdoor display. And so, it could be the products that someone is selling in a retail use in an accessory commercial unit. They put some of them on a table outside to draw attention to people walking by. All right, and then the standards continue. So vehicle parking is not required as the ordinance is proposed. Short-term bicycle parking would be required. So that's short-term just means like a bicycle rack. The city also has a long-term bicycle parking definition that is covered, like weatherproof bicycle parking. So this is really just saying that there should be a bicycle rack in front of the business. And then one building sign per street frontage. So if the live work allows one sign in total for the whole building. For the accessory commercial unit, if it's a corner lot, there could be one sign on each street. And then you could have a vehicle parked on site that is associated with the business. And the accessory commercial unit would not be allowed in an accessory dwelling unit or accessory structure. And so just clarifying that a little bit, the accessory dwelling unit standards that were approved almost 2 years ago now, I believe, or no, a year ago. No, 2 years ago. Allow accessory dwelling units by right, so anyone can have an accessory dwelling unit in a residential district if it meets the setbacks and the height limits, that kind of thing. And so that change didn't really specify how home businesses would be treated in accessory dwelling units. And so what we're trying to do here is just clarify live work. Yes, you can have an accessory building or ADU. ACU, you could not. All right, and so just to sum that up, I have these tables. And so you can see here the comparison of home occupation and live work as they exist today in the zoning code. And so home occupation more restrictive. And then with TC-12-21, home occupation goes away. The special use permit requirement for live work goes away. And then you have the introduction of the accessory commercial unit. And there are different standards between live work and accessory commercial unit. And so that is the effect of TC-12-21. What I'd like to do is just show everyone the web page. I think many of you probably saw this web page and it's how you found this meeting this evening, but let me show that right now so you can see that. So if you go to the city website, raleighnc.gov, and search for accessory commercial, this should be the first result, this webpage. This has information about the text change and these meetings. So there's going to be another meeting tomorrow night at Carolina Pines Park. And then it just has the summary. And then also, if you go to the text change cases webpage, there's a link to go to the engagement portal where you can enter your comments and questions, and we can respond to those. So that's the presentation. And now we can open it up for questions. And so I did have a first question here in person that I want to respond to, which was, what does special use permit mean? So a special use permit is an additional requirement for a development where you have to go to the Board of Adjustment. It's a public hearing, and the Board of Adjustment has to review your development plan to see if it is compatible with the surrounding area, and that it's going to have minimal impacts on nearby property. And then other people can come and give essentially testimony saying what they think would be the impact of something. And so without requiring a special use permit, the way that a zoning permit is granted for these uses is that you go to the city office, you submit an application form, and a staff person would basically look at that list of standards in the code and say, is what you're proposing meeting all those standards listed in the code? And if you meet the standards, then staff will give you the permit. That's right. So yeah, we really wouldn't have a public hearing. The staff review process is administrative, is what they call it. So it happens in the city office. I do want to point out that special use permits.
What is the appeals procedure from that determination?
So zoning approval can be appealed on the grounds that there is an error. So if there's an administrative approval, the way you would appeal that is to say,
From to whom is the
that staff erroneously approved it when, even though there was a conflict with the zoning standard. So for a typical development, like if you were building a house and somebody got a permit to build a house, and then the neighbor said, well, I see your foundation, you're over the setback line. They could then go appeal and say, the house plan that you got permitted is breaking the setback. I want you to redo the permit. And then there will be a review of that appeal. So a zoning permit for an accessory commercial use, you would have to have, again, you have to appeal based on one of those standards not being met, which would be difficult because they are largely related to the operation of the business.
What is the relationship between these proposed rules and citywide zoning?
So these would be allowed in any residential district.
Any residential district in the city.
That's correct.
So unless you're in a area covered by a homeowners association, or you have restricted covenants, most of which expire after a period of time. I just looked up mine. They were 25 years. So someone could build this in my residential single family area.
Not right now, but if it's approved, they
If it's
could.
approved.
Right, yes. And the other, I think you're using the word build, which that could be the way it happens. Somebody could build an addition or build a new structure to accommodate this.
Okay, let's use the word use.
But right, they would likely just establish it in an existing house, and they would say, well, now in this existing house, I'm going to have a hair salon or something like that.
Or as I remember when I grew up in northern New Jersey, and these rules are going back to northern New Jersey, and like most people left.
What part of New Jersey?
Patterson, Passaic.
Okay, my mom's from Morris County, and my cousin used to live in Patterson.
Oh, okay, I worked in Patterson, I practiced law in Patterson back in the 1950s and early 60s. Now, if these rules have citywide application, in other words, someone could open up, a restaurant next door to me in my area right now.
Mm-hmm.
Or eating establishment, or basically a brokerage office, or accountant's office, which were very popular, basically, for home usage or physicians at the time.
Yep.
Now, how about you say one on-site parking, but how about people working here? So they'll be utilizing, and the customers, the on-street parking to detriment of all their other neighbors?
Yeah, so the reason that we left out parking requirements is because there's another text change that is in development right now that is likely to remove all parking requirements in every zoning for pretty much every use.
Now, I see hours of operation for 6 a.m. I know currently the rules in Raleigh prohibit any sound before 7 a.m. You can't use a blower or do construction, but you're saying that this could be at 6 a.m. An hour earlier than is prohibited for other issues.
Yeah, so just because a business is operating does not mean that it's creating sound that's in violation.
But it could.
Well, then it would be.
But you're saying it's permitted.
It would be, if it created that type of sound, it would then be in violation of the noise ordinance, and that would become a different part of the city's ordinances that would be enforced.
No,
So you could call the police and say.
See, you said production of artwork and toys. Now, toys are built in
Sir,
basically.
can I ask you to pause for a moment? I think you've asked 3 or 4 questions now. I'd like to open it up to others, see if there are any other questions. Okay, so I'm going to turn around now to people who have joined us online and see if there are any questions. And so if you're online, you should be able to just unmute yourself and you can speak to the room. And so if anyone would like to do that, if we have too many people, we'll use the chat.
Yeah, I am fielding a few questions.
Okay.
In case they choose not to come to the mic, there are a few questions regarding eating establishments.
Okay, well, let's start with those then.
And what other requirements would be imposed on an eating establishment if they met qualifications for it?
Okay, so the question is, what other requirements would apply to a restaurant? So restaurants are also subject to Wake County health codes. And so they would have all the same permitting requirements, health inspections, grease traps, fire suppression, anything that goes along with any cooking equipment, plumbing facilities they require would all be required in the same way by the county. And if they couldn't meet those, then the county would deny them a permit for that business.
May I speak to that today?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Today I called Wake County, the department that takes care of that as far as eating establishments. And they say it absolutely positively, they do not go into, they do not allow, they do not check. It's illegal to have an eating establishment into your home. They said they would never do it. I would think that these two things are so far apart, I can't imagine them getting together. I can't imagine Wake County even wanting to inspect all these ridiculous things in the home. That's my one question. And the other question that I have is, what need does this, there's no need for this. And number 3, the pictures that you show as examples do not match the requirements, which is you're not supposed to have it look like a store on the outside. Or did I read it wrong? Is it okay if it looks like a store from the outside?
It is difficult. Well, in what sense? You mean having like a display window? Or having outdoor display?
Well, all the wonderful, heartwarming corner store pictures that we all grew up with, they look so swell. When I look at what the requirements are, it seems like they would not meet your requirements. I mean, one of them had outdoors. One of them had outdoor seating.
Outdoor, that's right. Outdoors. It is difficult to find examples of this in other cities because these standards are a little bit more restrictive than probably a lot of those example images, the zoning in those locations. And so, yeah, it is difficult to find examples of this. But going back to the health department question, that's correct. That is a legitimate issue where, yeah, it may be difficult for someone to establish one of these businesses because of those other code requirements that aren't part of the city zoning. And, you know, one of the ways that people might try to solve that is by, as we pointed out, that it might not be that they use just an existing house, but that they put an addition on a house and that the addition is constructed to meet some of those requirements. or it could require some significant renovations to an existing structure. But yeah, those are legitimate concerns. I do want to say that, you know, what is the need? The city council has had a discussion in one of their committees, the Economic Development and Innovation Committee, where they expressed the desire for there to be more opportunities for people to have access to food within their neighborhoods without driving. So it's particularly fresh and healthy food. So that was the origins of this. They authorized staff to write this ordinance, and this is what we have come up with. This is not the end of the process. This is the beginning of the process. So from here, it will go to the Planning Commission. They will have a chance to review it and make recommendations. And then the City Council will have the final review, and they can also make changes at the City Council. And so, you know, if these are things that you want to communicate to the Planning Commission and the City Council, that is why we have the engagement portal on the city website. So again, if you go to the city website, raleighnc.gov, and search text change cases, on that page, you'll see this text change listed, and then there's a link to the engagement portal where you can enter your comments and your questions, and those will be transmitted to the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Okay, may I make one
Yes.
more comment?
RaleighNC.gov, city website. And you search text change cases. That's the name of the web page on the site. And once you get to that page, at the top of that page, there's a big link that says engagement portal. And once you're there, you'll see the list of the active text changes and which ones you can comment on because they're active.
But you're saying that's the way I can communicate to the council and to planning.
Yes, and that's open right now. So you can go, you can go right now and put your comments and questions.
I have to say,
May I make one more comment, please?
It's gonna destroy phone batteries.
of course it will.
So we do have a little bit of talk going on between in-person and virtual. And so what I'd like to do is, there is one person trying to speak on the virtual side, but I want to go back to Keegan and say, were there any other questions that came up?
Yes.
I have a question.
Okay, we had another question that came up in the chat. We're going to answer that one first, and then we'll
Okay.
go back to.
I put mine
okay?
in the chat, so
Okay,
answer that.
all right, so Keegan.
Yes, it says, please explain why hair and nail salon owners can make use of this, but a massage business, not parlor, review establishment licensing.
Yeah, that was sort of a value judgment of thinking about the perception of certain massage uses. And so, again, if that's something you want to see included, that's certainly something you can communicate to the Planning Commission and the City Council and say, add that back in. We can make a note of that here, but I would say, you know, go to the engagement portal and put that in a comment, and then we can bring that up with the Planning Commission.
May I say one more thing, pretty please?
Okay, but I do want to make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard here, but yes, go ahead.
Okay, one reason it seemed early on that the council wanted to do this is they said it would fix the food desert issue when people are a mile away or more from a grocery store. But the only, under my research, the only place this is true is in Southeast Raleigh. So that they were applying this ridiculous thing for the whole city for no reason.
So the comment was that City Council's motivation for this is based on food deserts. Food deserts are a term that means a place where there's not a grocery store or other store that sells fresh food within a certain distance, or people don't have access to vehicles. And so the comment was those only exist in Southeast Raleigh, and therefore this is not relevant to other parts of the city. So that's noted.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so let's turn back to the in-person for a moment. Are there any questions in the in-person group?
You know, I see that it's a valid thing to say that you don't want people to travel far to get food. So why does Raleigh allow apartment buildings to build without any commercial on the first floor?
Mhm.
Now, a good model would be Park and Market at North Hills and the Publix on East Street, where people live in that building, and you stay within the building and that, but the women's club is like off into a zone where you have to take a car to go to Harris Theater, the mall, any of those places.
Women's Club Drive over on
Women's club drive.
So the
And that was
question,
permitted without, and we were at meetings saying, why don't you put
Why don't you put
a
a
supermarket there?
That might be changing soon, but,
told them to do that.
so the question was, why does the city allow apartments to be developed without retail uses in the ground floor? So the answer to that question is, the city allows that in almost every situation. So in the majority of the city's mixed-use zoning districts, which includes commercial mixed use, neighborhood mixed use, office and office mixed use, you are allowed to have retail or office uses in the ground floor. And then in the residential mixed use district, you are allowed to have retail if you're on the corner of two public streets. There are not currently commercial uses allowed in apartments in the residential 10 district. And so this would allow that in a residential 10 in an apartment, the ACU. But that's kind of the city's approach. We can allow those things, but forcing someone to establish a particular use tends to go badly. What can end up happening is they build that space. If they can't find a tenant, what happens to it? It stays empty. Then they come back to the city and say, this didn't work out. Can we convert this to an apartment? Can we convert this into the gym or the laundry for the apartments? And so it's just from a market perspective, we do have to rely a little bit on what the market is willing to provide. And so particularly if you look around downtown, there just are starting to be a lot of apartment buildings. It's not clear that there's enough foot traffic and retail demand for all of those to have all of their ground floors currently occupied by retail.
So, can I understand this? I can move into a house in a nice block and select one maybe decide to put this structure on the property or put it back and have solid signs and nothing say that. Is that, did I get that right?
So the question is, if someone wants to establish an accessory commercial unit next door to my house, I have no say in whether or not it gets approved. The answer to that is, as this is drafted, the answer is that's right. You would not be able to say no. Again, you could appeal if you believe that that use is violating one of the standards in the code, but you couldn't. Yeah, there would not be a process for you to say, I think this should be blocked purely on value judgment or public opinion, as you could with a zoning case.
Well, in terms of value judgment, I'm concerned about the value of my home or any other homes in my neighborhood. There's no concern here for that. Now, all I know is I'll be fighting the assessment on that.
I do want to respond to that. There is not no concern for the impacts of these. There's actually 4 slides of restrictions on these that do limit the impacts of them. So I just want to make sure that we are speaking the same language, so to speak, in the sense that.
Well, I asked you about zoning.
Yes.
And whether or not this has citywide application unless it's prohibited by a homeowners association or still applicable covenants. Now, I've checked my home, my covenants expired 2 years ago. And my taxes have gone up and up and up. Now, all of a sudden, will I be able to appeal because my home isn't worth as much as someone has a business next door?
Could you appeal your tax appraisal?
Oh,
Is that your
yes.
question?
Yes.
I do not know enough about county and city revenue to know what appeals are
Well, this will
available.
have a definite impact on county and city revenue because it'll diminish home value.
Okay, noted. All right, let's see if there's more questions in the
Can I ask?
chat here. Yes, ma'am.
Where there's an eating establishment, sometimes there's an odor that comes from the establishment. Is there a way to filter, like Purex, really strong?
Yeah, so the question is, when eating establishments create odors, how would that be managed? Because the odors could be perceived by neighboring properties. And so, again, that would largely be through the county health department. And so if there is a cooking device that is, you know, basically a stove, an oven, a griddle, those all pretty much require an exhaust hood and a vent. Now, of course, Charterville, you can see that that exhaust vent is pumping the smoke out. They do attempt, I believe, to try to direct that in particular directions, like towards the street. But yeah, the wind is going to do a lot of
I didn't
that.
know if there'd be charcoal or something like that, maybe, or some odors.
That's not the kind of thing that zoning typically regulates. That's more of a building code, health code, fire code type of thing.
And
So yeah, we don't really have any
now we're
provisions
talking
for that.
about eating food. Like downtown right now, we have anywhere you can do it on bicycle.
Yeah.
If it was a residential, is that allowed, or would it have to have all their restaurant attending?
So this specifically prohibits outdoor seating. So you would have to either take it with you and go somewhere else, or you have to eat inside. And I do want to stress the scale of these uses is a maximum of 1,000 square feet or 40% of the building square footage that it's in. So 1,000 square feet is 20 feet by 50 feet. That's about twice the size of this room. It is large relative to a person's house, but relative to a typical restaurant, that is a small amount of space to try to accommodate everything. It would be difficult to establish a restaurant, a full-service restaurant, in one of these spaces. I think you're more likely to see a coffee shop, you know, a quick service, you know, like, you know, breakfast or pastry type place, small bakery. I think those are the types of eating establishments you're more likely to see because of the restriction on scale here.
You have a structure, you have to move, can you rent that out?
So it's not, so the question is, if you have a separate structure, could you rent it out to a business that's not related to the person who lives there? So the key here is the accessory commercial unit must be within or attached to the existing building, the principal building on the site, so a house. Okay, so you have to have a house, there has to be someone living in the house, and then you could put an addition on the house if you needed more room for this use, or you could just convert an extra room in the house for this use, or multiple rooms, as long as they're meeting that size restriction. So it would not be a separate structure. It would be part of the existing house on the lot. So the way that the code is written is that there has to be someone living there. Now, whether or not the person who operates the business is that person or is related to that person, there is some difficulty in regulating those relationships. And so really we simplified it to just say there has to be someone living there.
Would that be a tenant, a separate tenant from the homeowner?
Yeah, yes, it could.
So you could rent out, you could qualify the premises by renting out a room.
That's right.
But it couldn't be short term, very long.
Right. It would have to be,
How long? A month?
typically 6 months is considered long-term rental, I believe.
Now, I see 50, would these people be permitted to have signage in front of each of these homes in a residential area?
So that the draft ordinance said you could have one building sign per street frontage. So a building sign is a sign mounted on the wall of a building and must be flat on the wall, so it can't project from the wall.
So this is my high-priced residential area, and I can have people putting signs out front or on the wall. You say here, 50 square feet. Outdoor, 50 square feet, so I could have a high-priced place where I'm paying a fortune in for the assessments, but my neighbor could have a 50-foot sign there, pushing his hamburgers or whatever.
I believe the 50 square feet you're referring to is the outdoor display of products.
Or they could have 50 feet display area, 50 by 10, 50 by
10 by 5, so about the size of a large picnic table. a large dining table.
Well, that I would love to see next door to me.
Okay, I'm going to pause right there. Do we have any questions coming in from the virtual meeting?
Yeah, we did have one. I answered it, but maybe we could people. Is there a process to close the business if the owner violates any of the guidelines? For instance, the business stays open until 2 a.m., sometimes chairs outside, etc.
Yeah, so the question is, how would somebody report a complaint about a business that's not complying with these rules? And so that's through a division in the Planning and Development Department that's called zoning enforcement. And so if you believe a property owner or business operator is not complying with the zoning laws, you call them. They will send an enforcement personnel out there to check that report. They will document it. They'll take photographs. They'll ask questions of the operator or the property owner. And then if they do determine that there's a violation, they send that person a notice of violation and give them a period of time, typically 30 or 60 days, to rectify the violation. If it is not corrected during that time, then the city has the option to assess a civil penalty of, I believe typically is $50 per day that the violation is not corrected. And so that's basically what would happen. Now, I believe the city also has nuisance ordinances where at some point, if something is just a consistent nuisance, there are methods where the city is able to condemn property, but that's a pretty extreme, those have to be pretty extreme situations. I'm John Anacross. I work in planning and development at the city. Hey, let's see. I see a question. If someone puts this says ADU, this says accessory dwelling unit, but I think the intent is accessory commercial unit. If someone puts up accessory commercial unit in a homeowner association neighborhood, it is up to the homeowners association to deal with it, not the city. Correct? Question mark. The answer is both can deal with it. So if one of these is violating the city standards, the city could enforce the zoning standards. If the homeowners association prohibits this type of use, then it really at that point, if it's not in violation of the city standards, but it is in violation of the homeowners association standards, it is up to the homeowners association to bring private legal action against the operator of that business. So that would be a civil legal action, essentially threatening to sue or suing in civil court to stop that from happening. That's how HOA rules are enforced. And the city does not enforce HOA rules. We enforce our own zoning.
How is trash collection and waste collection?
That's a good question. And that's something that we are still working on. Yes, have a good evening. Thank you for being here. We think in most cases that these operators will ask the city for roll carts and want to use roll cart service. There is potential that if it was, of the maximum size, 1,000 square feet, somebody could potentially seek a small dumpster. Then there would be the question of, well, how does that dumpster get serviced? You can't really get a dump truck behind somebody's house in most cases. So I think, most cases, people are going to be required to, or have to rely on the roll carts from solid waste services. Because we wouldn't allow a dumpster in a front yard. So I guess there's maybe a chance they could have a wide enough driveway down the side of their property that a truck could get back there, but it seems unlikely. Seems difficult. Let's see.
There's noise from the chain, such as a building
Yeah. So the key there is that all these things have to be internal to the building. You can't be conducting these activities outside. And we have restricted the light manufacturing uses to the ones that are seem to be the lowest impact. So it's actually not any light manufacturing. We've actually selected a subgroup of light manufacturing uses that are allowed in use. And that's things like watch repair, clothing making, things that we expect to be smaller in scale, not like, a full service wood shop with like, and again, how much activity can you get in that square footage? It is going to be somewhat limited.
I personally think it's pretty cool.
Okay.
I'm big concerned about that.
I see a question in the chat that says this is already law and they didn't get input. That's incorrect. So this is the beginning of the public review process. This is to invite you to participate in the the Planning Commission review and the City Council review. So you can come to those public meetings.
I did respond to that, but it was a little after. So.
I see another question. Why would you require a bike rack? Can't bikes stand up by themselves? That's just crazy. Well, sometimes people like a space to lock a bicycle if they're going to go into a business and shop. They want to be comfortable that they don't have to worry about their bicycle being stolen. I know I myself have ridden a bicycle for commuting on many occasions and did lock my bicycle. In fact, when I was in elementary school and rode my bike to school, I would lock my bicycle when I got there. So that is the purpose of a bicycle rack. Yes, my elementary school was embedded in a residential neighborhood and I locked my bicycle.
John, can you have an ADU and an ACU in the same property?
Yes, you could, but the ACU would have to be in the principal structure. It would have to be attached or within the main house, not the accessory dwelling unit.
Is there a minimum lot size to be able to do this?
No. The building would still have to meet the setbacks. So, that's a limiting factor as well.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So I see a question. Is this the only outreach you'll be doing? For now, yes, this is the only planned meeting type outreach. We, of course, Planning Commission and City Council meetings get noticed through the regular channels when their agendas get published and on the website. And then when this goes to City Council, that public hearing will be published in the newspaper. And then we have the engagement portal, which will remain open for the next 2 weeks. So yeah, that is the engagement. All right, well, looks like our question and comment activity is winding down. So we're going to be here. This meeting is posted till 7. If we really don't have a lot of activity towards about 6:30, we'll probably close it up a little early. But you're welcome to stay on the line if you'd like. Otherwise, feel free to go about your regular business for this evening. And thank you for joining again. More information at raleighnc.gov. And you can search accessory commercial to get to the main webpage for this. And then the text change cases webpage will get you to the engagement portal. So online, I think we have around 15 people, I want to say, maybe 12, something like that.
Did you record
Yep, we're recording right now. So we can make this available on the webpage. Probably take us, since there's a holiday on Thursday, it might not be till Monday or Tuesday next.
What address?
We'll put it on that main accessory commercial unit page.
This is district, you're doing this meeting for A.
Yeah, so this meeting is supposed to be accessible to folks that live in the northern parts of Raleigh, so that part of your Hillbrook. And then tomorrow night will be at Carolina Pines, and that way we live in the southern part of the city, have an accessible location here and stuff.
When do you have to give the report back?
There could be a special planning commission meeting in December where this could be first appear on one of their agendas. There's a lot of text changes happening right now, so we have to kind of manage the agendas like that. So if it's not early December, it's probably going to be January. Yeah, I see. What percentage of housing in Raleigh is non-HOA? I don't think we have gathered that data. That's just, it's difficult to try to cater your zoning code to a myriad of HOA standards. That takes a lot of time and effort to keep track of. And, might not, it's also not necessarily the best way of writing zoning to try to work around HOAs. It might be something that local real estate organizations might know, or home builders organizations might know. And there's another question here. This would only affect people in houses built before 1978, before HOAs were required. I am pretty sure I'm aware of active HOAs that predate 1978. I guess that's a reference to particular zoning requirements that require long-term management through an HOA. So yeah, I think it's more likely that neighborhoods after that are going to have an active HOA. It's not always the case. And HOA rules can expire, and HOAs can change their rules. So. Well, I see there are still people on the line. You do have staff here, so if you have general questions, feel free to ask those as well. We're at your service.
Some businesses have, parking demands is low and,
Uh-huh.
you know, like, some say, high, or certain,
Sure.
so where's the overflow of?
The question in the in-person is, what happens to if there is a lot of demand for parking and the business has not provided parking? So the expectation there is people will walk or bike to the business or park on the street. And, again, this is coming from the acknowledgement that there is another text change that's been authorized by the City Council that is likely to remove all parking requirements, parking minimums, for pretty much all zoning districts and pretty much all uses. And so with that in mind, it didn't really make sense for us to be imposing parking, knowing that there's going to be another change that's probably going to remove that immediately. And so this is not requiring parking. And also acknowledging that the desired outcome is walkable businesses, that people could choose to walk to one of these businesses instead of driving to another business that's farther away, another similar business. I see a question that's what about people with disabilities? So there are, to my knowledge, exemptions for many small businesses from meeting Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. in this case of these ACUs, my understanding is that if they provide any parking on their site, they do need to provide the minimum ratio of handicap accessible parking. And so what that would typically mean for most of these businesses is that would be the single, maybe they'd have two parking spaces, one is handicapped and one is not. But I think what's probably likely to happen is because of the requirement that if they provide any parking, that they have to have a handicap accessible space. Many businesses using this code will probably choose not to have any parking. It seems like a likely outcome in order to avoid that requirement. Now, that doesn't stop people from willingly constructing a ramp to get into their business or having an entrance that is accessible by wheelchair. I see, what about elderly people? So to the extent that an elderly person has limited mobility, in many cases, that does qualify as a disability. So I guess I'm having difficulty answering that question. So they can have personal vehicles, but if they have a vehicle that they use for deliveries, that they use to go provide a service off-site, and that vehicle might have their logo on the side of it, that kind of thing, then you can only have one of those. Right? So say I run a plumbing business. Again, everything would have to be inside the house. If you store plumbing supplies in your backyard, but suppose you did that, then if you had two plumbing vans, you can't have them both there. One of them's got to be somewhere else. Although I don't really think that a plumber would be fit into the allowed use definitions either. So like a florist would probably be a good example. I'm a florist.
You don't think a plumber or an HVAC?
I don't think so, because those are not really considered personal service. Those are considered contractor based. It's a different. That is typically more in the light industrial category because they store those materials on site. Right? You go to a plumbing shop or like an electrician shop. They usually have a yard where you can put vehicles, their equipment.
So what was the name for those two different names on the commercial?
So a contractor can be under light industrial. Yeah, I'm trying to think of how we would typically classify. If a contractor is totally enclosed within a building and it's just the office where they dispatch the workers, that could probably be considered an office. But yeah, a lot of it comes down to how is the floor area within the building being used, right? So if I'm using a lot of that floor area within the building to store materials, supplies, all that kind of stuff, then we're probably not going to look at it as an office. I'm going to say that's a contractor, not an office space. So that's kind of We're not getting going in the light industrial. Okay.
Do you mind making Eric and John, Eric and
Yeah.
John? Those?
Mhm.
Thanks.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
I would say, I would encourage you to go on the engagement portal. The engagement portal on the text change cases. And then, if you want to be contacted about this as you go forward. That way, if you want to get updates on my email.
Well, I got an email that this was happening. So, I don't know. All right. I just didn't know if you needed something.
Yep, we're recording, so we've got all our video. And video virtual meetings now.
I'm still old school.
Right. We're still getting used to it.
All right, thank you.
Yep, have a good night. All right, well, we are losing people pretty rapidly. It looks like there are no people joining late here. So we're going to take it to about 6:15. And if we don't get any new folks joined by 6:15 or see any new questions, we'll go ahead and bring this meeting to a close. I can see someone from earlier in the meeting has rejoined. Ms. Bailey, did you have another question? Okay. Go ahead. Can you be a little more specific about what you mean by power? Oh, okay. Yeah, so the city has the zoning code, and we also enforce the building code through our development review processes. And so the city would enforce those rules apply to the location and the structure of a building and what is intended to be placed inside of it. So those are things that the city controls through zoning and building code enforcement. The county has control over the public health code. And so that means when you have those specific uses, an eating establishment, for example, a restaurant, there are specific activities that occur within the restaurant that are not necessarily related to the structure or the placement of the structure on the lot. They are related to the ongoing operation of the building. And that's where the county has authority to regulate, like we talked about earlier, exhaust hoods, the preparation areas for food, disposal areas for food, sanitary conditions, those kind of things that are part of that health code. And so, yes, I think it's entirely possible that the county would look at the structure that the city is allowing and say, even though the city allows that structure and allows square footage in that structure to be dedicated to a particular use, if that use that's desired by the owner can't meet the health code, the county is within its authority to deny the permit for that food service use. That certainly could happen. And so at that point, the owner of that property would have a perfectly occupiable building. People could spend time there, go about their daily activities there. They just would not have a building where they could legally prepare and sell food to the public. And so that would be, that would be an unfortunate outcome for that person. It would be better if that person did more research to understand whether or not they could successfully do that. But that there is potential that could happen. I see we do have a new person who's joined the meeting just now who was not here before, I don't believe. Mr. Fleming, would you like to see the presentation or learn about the text change?
Thank you for asking. I'm going to drop in tomorrow night, if that's okay, and catch the whole thing.
Certainly, we'd like to have you. Well, we are getting to 6:20. Hearing that Mr. Fleming is going to join us tomorrow evening. At this point, seeing as that there, aside from Mr. Fleming, has not been any new people, and all the original attendees have left, or almost all. I think we are going to bring the meeting to a close, unless there are any objections, questions, or comments. We'll go ahead and call the meeting closed. Okay, so not hearing anything. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. This was the Tuesday, November the 9th, Ask a Planner meeting for accessory commercial units, text change TC-12-21. Again, visit the city webpage, raleighnc.gov, and search accessory commercial to find the main webpage for this. And you can also search text change cases to find the engagement portal where you can submit your comments and questions to be sent to the Planning Commission and the City Council. All right, so thanks everyone for joining. Have a wonderful evening.